Build your fits of the day with Abercrombie's newest denim drop. I'll tell you where to start. Abercrombie's 90s straight jean goes with any shirt from tees to sweater polos. Super versatile. Their loose and baggy jeans are more trend forward, so I grab those when I go out with friends. Right now, get 25% off on almost everything at Abercrombie. Offers valid in stores and online January 23rd, 2025 to January 28th, 2025. In U.S. and Canada, exclusions apply as indicated. Online price reflects discount.
Auto insurance can all seem the same until it comes time to use it. So don't get stuck paying more for less coverage. Switch to USAA Auto Insurance and you could start saving money in no time. Get a quote today. Restrictions apply.
USAA.
The sport teaches grit, determination, goal setting. Kids get structure. Nobody cares on third down if a black kid, a white kid, an Armenian kid, an Asian kid, it doesn't matter. It's 3rd and 12. We got to get this done. I've been bleeding and sweating with these guys all year long. We have this great shared experience.
Welcome to another episode of the Coach and Coordinator Podcast. I'm Keith Grabowski, and today I'll be talking with Nick Esayian, CEO of Light Helmets, about creating a culture that prioritizes both player safety and performance. While Nick and I will get into the technology in today's helmets, this really is a conversation that highlights how every decision we make for our program has an effect on the culture and the experiences we create for our players and their families. I've been following what Light Helmets has been doing for some time now and their innovations, and they have the #1 ranked helmet as rated by Virginia Tech Helmet Ratings. So stay tuned for an interesting conversation with Nick Esayian, CEO of Light Helmets. Guys, we're back for another episode of the Coach and Coordinator Podcast. If you've noticed, we've heard quite a few voices on the podcast here as we began the year. This is my first one I'm sitting down and doing here. And for your reference, everything that I do is simply just going to be the Coach and Coordinator Podcast. You see that we've created a network of series and episodes and hosts, and I'm excited to be doing this. And I think this is a very important topic to kick things off. We're thinking about this in terms of building a program that prioritizes both safety and performance. You hear Tony Holler talking about it on our sprint-based football podcast all the time about healthier and happier athletes and performance-based types of things. And so that's at the core of what we're going to talk about today. And we have Nick Esayian, who is the CEO of Light Helmets, with us today to discuss how these tools that we have with the different equipment we can help select for our players complement those leadership strategies that we have that we're implementing to create a culture of success. You know, when we do it right, our culture stretches across everything, even how we go about deciding what's going to go on our players' heads. So, Nick, it's great to have you here. I'm excited to dig into a number of topics today, and I've been following you guys for some time now, so it's great to have you here.
Thanks, Keith, for having me. Excited to be here. I've listened to the show. It's a great topic. You know, as a father, as a fan, having played some football, high school, and a little bit of college football at the University of Wisconsin Whitewater Small School. You know, I love the game. And this was just such a unique opportunity when it came upon us. You know, we've accomplished a lot. We've learned a lot. There's still more to be learned, but we've met some great people, and the football community's been awesome. It's an interesting space. So it'll be exciting to sit and talk with you today about all these topics surrounding head health, safety, helmets, what's going on currently, and what's going to happen in the future.
Yeah, and as I started saying here, you know, if we sat down, Nick, you and I just sat down and all we were going to talk about was safety. I know a good portion of our users probably click off, but we're talking about performance here. It's something when I first met Scott Peters, who just became the offensive line coach for the Cincinnati Bengals. You know, when I met Scott always talked about, you know, the program he had put together for technique on the line of scrimmage. He didn't put it together necessarily with safety in mind. He put it together with performance in mind. He wanted to create a better, safer game. Those two words together. And I see in a lot of ways, in learning a lot about football helmets, about player safety, that you can have both of those things. And I think when you have a tool, a piece of equipment, or something that we're not just a piece of safety equipment, the way that this works is going to be it's better performance for your players as well. I think you have something special in the market. And, you guys do have the number one helmet in the market right now is rated by Virginia Tech, which is obviously, if you're going to be rated by anybody, that's the gold standard. When I talk about that part of it, not just the safety, but the performance, I guess talk a little bit about how really light helmets helps you accomplish both of those goals.
Yeah, all this technology really came out of the auto racing and the military space. SG helmets was Bill Simpson, Chip Ganassi. Everyone knows Simpson Racing. We've seen it on the helmets, the seats, window nets, race suits, etc. And in auto racing, speed is king. And in football, speed is king as well. It's a performance game, performance sports, and weight is the enemy of speed. You need more power to carry more weight. And, it's a safety issue, but performance-wise, what we see is, think about an NCAA roster. If you had 73 players and they all switched from the industry standard, let's say it's a Shutt F7 with a mask on it, could be a Vices helmet, Speedflex, whatever. The helmets are between 5 and 6 pounds, the majority of them. If you can go to a helmet that's 3 pounds, 3.5 pounds, and you can cut, let's say, 2 pounds a player, it's over 140 pounds. There's not a coach that's listening to you that says, hey, let's get 3 45-pound plates out and tote those babies around and a couple of small 10-pounders with it. We think that's a good idea when it's hot in Florida or Texas and it's the fourth quarter. Fatigue not only breeds injury, but fatigue breeds a weakened spirit, right? We hear the Jimmy Johnson quote where he says, fatigue makes cowards of all of us. And he was talking to the kids at the University of Miami, and he's 100% right. So when we can take 2 pounds off of, let's say, a Formula One car that weighs 1,600 pounds, they'll spend millions of dollars to do that. Think about a wide receiver that's running a 4.2 or a 4.3 40. If you can take 1% of their body weight, 2 pounds off a 200-pound person, you've done everything if you can keep that person safe or even safer and improve performance. And when you can do that with a team, all the inches matter. And when somebody is not toting those weights around, meaning the whole team, that they don't need the superfluous weight, they're going to perform better at the end of the game. And that was one of the foundational elements of why we actually pursued this to begin with.
Yeah, I think, in looking at over time, certainly there's been a ton of evolution of what the football helmet is now. And obviously the technology going into it, it's added a ton of expense as well. I was telling you before we got going, probably around the early 2000s, I'm buying in bulk for under $100 a piece, a helmet, right? Like, can't get anywhere near that right now. And the technology between those really weren't a lot different between whatever competitors. I think also, though, when I look at the industry, it certainly has been built as, kind of a good old boy network, like on the relationships. And this is the guy who's always showed up at my school and always been here. But I think, now if we're thinking about, as I mentioned, like our leadership as coaches and what we want to create for our players, I think we have to go beyond that. And we have to look at everything that is out there. And I know, there's been the main names that have dominated this. And, some of those companies that were around now either have merged or they're gone. But I think you owe it to your players as a leader to say what is best for them and their health, what's going to help us as a team perform better. As you said, we're going to shed 140 pounds as a unit walking around out on that fields, or all important things. So, from that perspective, what would be your advice to a coach, especially a new coach, sitting down and thinking about, the guy who knocks on my door and has been there forever versus, looking at some new things that are out there?
Sure. I mean, relationships obviously are very powerful. And, there are legacy companies that, have been in business for nearly 100 years. And you may have been dealing with the same rep for a long period of time. And I understand how relationships work. In all the businesses I've had, they're powerful. But at the same time, our whole game, the whole game of football is predicated around competition. You have 3 quarterbacks show up, you're going to pick the one that performs the best. You're not going to pick the one that you're friends with the father, at least most of the time. And that's a whole nother topic that probably gets covered, especially at a youth level. And here's the reality. When there's fewer competitors, there's less innovation. We see it in the world of cellular. It can be credit cards. It can be banks. It can be automobiles or anything else. Right now, you really have 2 doors to go to and then light. That's it. There's the Riddell bucket, and then, Shutt bought Vices several years ago. Zenith is no longer, an operating company. And Adams is gone. Wilson is gone. Rawlings is gone. Bike is gone. Why is that? And if you take a snapshot of that, there's no way that I can compete with 200 reps that a bigger company has. I mean, we have sales reps, we have dealers, we do direct to consumer, we're in all the big box retailers. But what I would urge coaches to do is some people just look at the NFL quote unquote poster. And if you look at the bottom right on the NFL poster, it says, do not extrapolate this data for college, high school, or youth play, that the data is predicated on NFL size and collision. The helmets people are buying for high schools, for youth leagues, even for D2 and 3 colleges, they're not buying those helmets. They're not buying a $1,700 precision fit helmets. Now, our helmets outperform those helmets at Virginia Tech, and in a lot of cases, even in the NFL tests. But the lab tests have to have context. The NFL test is for the NFL. The NFL doesn't even release the actual concussion data by helmet to the players. They're basing it off clinical information, not what happens on the field. You have to ask them why that's the case. Nobody else really looks at that. So for a coach, number one is obviously safety is on the list, performance is on the list, price is on the list, support. Can you have somebody help you get fitment on the list? Refurbishment. If I send 100 helmets in and I only get 90 back because 10 have catastrophic failures, gosh, I got to figure that into my equation. If I have half brand A and half brand B and I send brand B in to brand A and I don't get any of them back and I have to buy all new brand A helmets, I just spent a bunch more money. If I send my helmets in and I don't know how much it's going to cost or when I'm going to get them back or if I'm going to get 1, 2, or 3 bills, those are all issues. And we've crafted this company from scratch based on listening to the coach of the kids have to want to wear, it's got to look cool. Our first helmets looked okay. The new helmets look fantastic. But I got 2 buyers, right? I have the kid that's 6 or the kid that's 36. Do I play better? Who else is wearing it? Does it look cool? Then I have the person that buys it. Safety, sustainability, not meaning I'm going to recycle the helmet, right? But can I get it recon? Can I get it painted? Can I get parts for it? How long does it take? Can I put coach to player in it? What happens when the new model comes out? And I can describe a little bit, but we've chosen to pursue solutions for all of those. But for a coach, I'd look at Virginia Tech first. They have an adult varsity standard, and then they have a youth standard. And then I would look at the star system on there, to group the helmets, obviously. You want a 5-star helmet. Then I would look at weight being critical. Obviously, there's a new NOXI standard out for 14 and under. Weight. The biomechanics of NFL players is the same. Neck strength's greater, but the speed and mass is also far greater. And 25-30% of the NFL concussions, you watch Romeo Doubs, had a Guardian cap on his helmet. He had a concussion, not a big hit, thwap, head on the ground, injury. Penn State tight end, when they're playing Notre Dame, we see more and more of that because the helmet weight has gone up traditionally because the helmets perform better on the lab test. But fitment is also key. And then I would get kids in iron neck and working on neck strength because just like reducing weight, increasing neck strength is something else that can reduce the number of concussions and also the frequency, or the severity.
Yeah, a lot of things you mentioned there that I want to dig into a little bit, in looking at your product. And you said we've looked at the whole thing from beginning to end and talking to coaches to construct this. So when I could buy those helmets for under $100 a piece and I got some back rejected, it was easy to turn those into trophies and, give them to our donors or raffle them off or whatever it might be. That was not a big expense. Now, these helmets get to be a big expense. So obviously you don't want a high rejection rate. That's important. But also, you think about a helmet's life and over time and, fitting all the different kids you need to fit over the years, the head sizes and shapes and all those things that you guys have also thought about the design of that too. In a lot of ways, you could look at the budget up front, but there's that budget over time as well in the replacement and adjusting helmets and all those things. You guys have thought about that really from end to end.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, our LS2 helmet is the first resizable helmet. Not only is it under the 3.5 pound, future NOXI standard whenever that starts to get enforced, but if you're a Pop Warner and you've got 300 helmets sitting in the shipping container, but you have 200 players, you still have to get all those helmets refurbished because you don't know what matrix of kid is going to show up, right? And how many mediums are you going to need? How many extra larges? So the way we designed the LS2 was that you could swap out the liner on it when you sent it in for refurbishment. So you could make an extra large a medium, or you could make a medium a large, and thus reduce the number of helmets. So you could buy a better quality helmet for your player that fit better, that was more comfortable, where he had less complaints in those first 2 weeks of practices that my neck hurts, I got a headache, the pads are pushing. We always use Ernie and Bert from Sesame Street as, Bert had a cone-shaped head and Ernie had like a spaceship-sized head. And both guys' heads might be the same diameter, but the Armenian dude's head is shaped different than the Polynesian dude's head. And how do I make that helmet fit at practice when there's 30 kids that are showing up? And I don't care if they're high schoolers at a freshman team. If you're at a big university like Utah, if you don't have 6 equipment people there, there's a lot of frustration, and it impacts new players, and it impacts what they tell their parents and that whole experience. And people usually don't complain about, hey, my pants are too big or too small. You have a little bit of that. But the helmet is something that's, it's a perceived because it's a real safety item. But the other component is it's something that, you have on all the time, whether you're in two-a-days, you're wearing it when, you get to a certain point where you're slinging the ball around, contact drills, et cetera, et cetera. So it's really a personal item. For the youth, the resizability and the fact that all of our helmets, you get a P-Fit helmet for a regular price. So if it's a youth helmet that costs $300, or you're in, let's say, our number one Apache, there are 20 panels on the inside. If you went and got scanned for a precision fit helmet from vendor A, there's 7 or 8 panels that they adjust. You get the helmet. If it doesn't fit right, it's got to go back and get adjusted again. We have 20 panels on the inside that can be quickly adjusted. All the parts are the same, so it's very easy to do, and it takes about 2 or 3 minutes. And then the other piece is jump up to the college level with that same mentality. All these kids are in the portal now, and that's a whole nother topic. If I have 5 helmets at University A and that kid switches to University B, what am I going to do with these precision fit helmets at the University A? Now I've got thousands of dollars worth of helmets sitting there. I can't get them repainted. They can't go with the athlete. Now you've got assets going from school to school, where with ours, you get that precision fit, but hey, it can be reformulated quickly. We have a scanning tool, or one of our reps can come in and do that. So trying to take into consideration what's going on in the environment, whether it's in college or whether it's youth budget, we've been nimble enough to listen and reflect that in the product development.
Looking at the college level, and I coached the Division III level at Baldwin Wallace, and we were fortunate to have dedicated equipment manager, full-time guy who had assistants. A lot of places that gets turned over to a coach, but the equipment manager can be a gatekeeper, whether that's up at the pros or at some of the smaller level colleges or even high schools who have those guys. For you, the guys who have been open to this, have bought light helmets, have that inventory of light helmets, what's been the response to, I guess, their ability to do the precision fit and, with all these, like you said, 20 panels that you guys have?
Sure. It's the 20 panels. And I'll give you an example if I've got one here. I'll just show you on one of the helmets. I'm going to hold this up. These fitment pads on the inside are super plush foam, and they come in different thicknesses. And then there's a shim kit. And if you look on the inside of this is an Apache. All the pads are exactly the same. So you don't have this huge parts inventory of all these different pads, and some need to be inflated. And do I check them when I'm playing at elevation because they're overinflated? And if it's cold and I'm playing at sea level, I got to take air out of them. Nobody does any of that, right? My punter warms up and that it's cold outside. I'm playing at Whitewater in late November, and the helmet gets sat down and there's no helmet heater. The thing's like a rock on the inside. Nobody's testing for this stuff, right? But the military tested for this stuff. And we brought that mentality over with our designs. And I'm going to use the AR-15 as an example. You could take a barrel off one and a trigger assembly, and you could swap them all around and everything fits. We've done the same thing with, our Apache, our Gladiator helmets, that all the fitment pads, the face mask, and everything else can be interchanged. It's very simple and put together. Individual can put 4 of these together in an hour from scratch. When you're in an equipment room, you can migrate through fitments quickly. You don't need to use the scanning tool. There's simple instructions, and we use military-grade Velcro to hold all the pads in. And that's true with the helmets we have in the NFL. I think we're in 28 of 32 locker rooms. We're at about 50 NCAA locker rooms, hundreds of high schools, hundreds of youth leagues. And then we get a lot of consumers that just roll into our facility where the parent has done some research and said, you're the only company that's got a plethora of doctors on your site that have tethers to the NFL, tethers to college teams, and they were involved in the development of the helmet. And you have the ratings, and you have the lighter weight. So I think we're headed in the right direction. We still have areas that we can make refinement in terms of helmet development, et cetera. But I think we're ahead of the curve right now. And one of those things is making it easy for college locker rooms to gestate these things, bring them in. And, a kid comes in and let's say he cuts his dreads and man, I got to make an adjustment to this helmet quickly. You don't want to have to send that back, wait 3 weeks, especially if it's a key player, right? He's got 5 helmets I got to deal with. You can do that in-house and get it done in 2 or 3 minutes and have him back out on the field.
Yeah, I think that's a huge benefit. I want to go back to, you were talking about, some of the players getting the concussions with the Guardian caps. And, I think what Guardian has done is great. But again, to me, you still have to be thinking about technique and performance and, all of that matters. But the biggest concern I had as I saw people adding these too, especially, game day, went back to, and I know they're not heavy, but you're still adding weight, the additional weight, and yet there's still concussions with these too. So I would love just to learn a little bit more about that and what the dynamic causing those things. But at the same time, what is, light helmet, your stance on adding the extra protection, adding layers of that to the helmet? I mean, we've seen it before. You go back to, I think it was a Buffalo Bills player who Don Beebe had that big, those were heavy. I remember there was one of those in our high school program. Like, who the heck would put this on their head? But yeah, I mean, I know it's a lot lighter. Guardian caps definitely are, but still that added element of additional weight and bulk.
Well, this helmet testing, and I'm going to use the NFL, and the NFL's spent a lot of money and made a lot of effort to attempt to advance the helmet technology. It's arguable about the direction of that. We're supportive of the NFL. They're supportive of us. We're in their recommended helmet, which is that top green tier of helmet. But the Guardian cap, I believe, was a solution for 2022. ESPN reported that NFL concussions were up 18%. Now, you think about the rule changes that have gone on over the last, say, 5 years. Now, more recently, the kickoffs changed. Before, you couldn't hit a defenseless receiver. The sensitivity to hitting quarterbacks running out of bounds changed significantly from 5 years ago. The rule didn't change, but how it's called has changed. When guys slide, the fact you can't touch a quarterback anywhere in the head at all. With all those rule changes, the concussions went up 18% in 2022. And this is the league because they're the only one that measures and divulges the info because they're being transparent. And then you have 2023, they were up again, but it was a single digit number. And then in 2024, they're up again. With the advancements in helmets and the rule changes, why is that happening? Our opinion, and our doctor's opinion, we have 12 docs on our advisory board, from the head of neurology at Baptist Health, Tal David, who was the Chargers doc, Peter Cummins, who worked with Tom Brady at TB12RX, the head of trauma here at Scripps La Jolla was the chief of staff, and a whole bunch of other docs, is by adding weight, you're adding energy into the equation in a lot of these head to ground injuries. So adding any weight whatsoever, we feel is a negative. Now, you have to have a minimum level of protection, and our helmets are all 5-star, number 1 at Virginia Tech, recommended helmet NFL. But if you can lighten that helmet up in that 80G impact where the Z is getting hit on a seam route, that extra 2 or 3 pounds now becomes 160 or 240 pounds. I went to a state school, so you have to check my math, but that's extra stress on your cervical structure. And if you stand there and think your neck is roughly the same diameter as your wrist, and you think of 250 pounds of force, that's a huge amount of force on that player's spinal structure. So the Guardian, to me, in my opinion, was a direct result of seeing concussions continue to go up. The NFL wants to protect their players. They want the best product on field. So this was a solution. And I think in a lot of cases, it actually reduced injury. Now, it's far different in a lineman that's hitting each other at a high torque, bigger guy, low speed impact, than when you have high speed guys running down the field, because, rotational forces are part of, we talk about that all the time.
Yeah.
This versus a direct hit, and the Guardian moves around, and that is a positive in reducing those rotational forces. But when you have 2 players moving at 21 miles an hour, and I think some of the guys are hitting 23 miles an hour now, instead of helmets glancing off each other, you have a catching, there's more friction between that, and you have more weight in the head to ground injury. So I think there's a more likely scenario where the guardian, especially in a practice, in these low speed drill type impacts, it's a positive. But, Romeo Dobbs is an example, and there have been others where somebody's already had an injury, so maybe they're more inclined, and I'm not a doctor, for a second injury thereafter. But when you add weight, you certainly are adding more energy. And in a head to ground impact, the earth doesn't move. And if you just take a 5-pound construction hammer and a 3-pound and you drop them, the 5-pound is going to cause more damage than the 3. And the ground doesn't move. That energy gets projected in the player's head and cervical structure. And that's certainly an issue.
Yeah. So the player side of it, I think, is of interest to us too. Let's start with and meet them where they're at. And I know, like in the first iterations of your helmet, and remember, talking to a coach and what his feedback from the kids was, yeah, it just doesn't look cool. So I do think your new helmets are phenomenal, great look to them. What's been the feedback on from those players when they put that helmet on for the first time? If they've been used to wearing one of these other ones that are much heavier, what's that experience like for them? How do they feel about it immediately? We're beyond the looks now. You guys have done a great job with that.
Yeah, no, the first helmet, right? Like everybody thinks their baby is a good looking kid. And then other people, as they'll say, oh yeah, he's real handsome or cute. And then they turn away and, they're chuckling. And we purchased a company right before the pandemic. So our first design really kind of wallowed through those 2 years where nobody was buying helmets. And it was a tough time for us as a company because we had just gotten proof of concept. We had the Gladiator, another company was helping us that the NFL actually had funded, Clyde. They did some internal work for us and external work from us. We had discussions with them, but we really didn't make any movement there. And the aesthetics were good, but they weren't great. Now that we have the newer helmet out, people love the aesthetics. We took a lot of time to get player opinion in terms of, instead of having 3 masks, we have 16 masks. There's titanium versions of the masks. We're even doing some customs for some of the players for 2025. The thing, though, that a Cam Jordan, who wore a helmet all year, or a Tyrod Taylor, or a Darius Robinson, who wore a helmet in college and then wore it, or a kid like Cam Rising, who wore the Vices helmet in a Rose Bowl 38-38 against Ohio State, and he had to leave the game because of a head injury and a fairly innocuous hit. When the players put this on after it's fitted, they're shocked at the weight. They're shocked at when you change direction, that the helmet's not trying to stay in the original direction when you move. When you're running out of bounds and somebody gives you that shot to the back, just to give you that last little jab, where your head would normally snap back, you don't have that. When you get hit and your head goes back to the ground, you can resist it because there's far less weight in that impact. And you're probably not as old as I am, but one of the worst hits I've ever seen was the Trent Green hit. He slid and he got hit and his head slammed back into the ground. It was a horrible hit. It had partial responsibility for his career ending. And those head to ground injuries, Trevor Lawrence, we saw at this season when he got hit sliding, there's more and more and more of that. So reducing the weight when that cantilever effect, when that head whip effect happens, is huge. But the big thing with quarterbacks and with receivers, getting your head around, or when you're an edge rusher and you're making that move from outside to inside or inside to outside or a spin move, the helmet weight is working against you because that object, when it's moving one way and you move another way, is resisting you, right? It's not part of your body. Fitment is key, but that extra mass is still being balanced by your cervical structure. And we'll often get the question, why would I want to be in the BMW when getting hit by a Suburban? Isn't heavier better? Well, if that were the case, we'd all wear a diving bell on our head, and a 50-pound helmet would score best on the test. In fact, we went through and we created a helmet called the BA1, which was Boat Anchor 1. We added 2 pounds of weight to our helmet, and I won't tell you which test it was, but the helmet went, way up to the top of the list just by adding weight. Now, this was in our early days. We figured out a way to do it without the weight, but it showed that weight could manipulate test results. And, there's some helmets out there now. There's a youth helmet that's 5 pounds, 15 ounces. Think about that. If you have a 6-year-old kid that weighs 60 pounds, wearing a 6-pound helmet, that's like me wearing a 22-pound helmet. Think of the forces on my cervical structure and how hard it is to control that when another 250-pound guy hits me. So the athletes that put this on, once they wear it, they don't want to take it off. They're faster. They react quicker. They can move their head around quicker. They don't have any neck pain in the early weeks of practice. And when you get the young kids, that's huge. The way it's vented. And of course, we still incorporate coach to player, all of the electronics that are needed at college level. And in fact, right now we're working with a camera company and have helmet that'll be on field, on television, without getting into too many details, with a 4K camera in the bumper that'll potentially be used in broadcasts for huddle POV videos. And think about the coaching tool that will be, when you can sit with your quarterback and see exactly what he saw from his perspective, not from the side, or what did your safety see? And then the tendencies you can pick up on where's your quarterback looking when he walks up to the line of scrimmage. And we're trying to think of these things. That's why it's great today to have the opportunity to talk about them. But players love the helmet. We haven't had people take them off when they get them on. And then the other component of it is the families.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that too.
You think about this, like, I'm sharing names on here and I don't think anyone will mind, but Dan Orlovsky's kids wear these helmets. Drew Stanton's kids wear these helmets. Mike Tannenbaum's kid wore this helmet. We could go through the list of Tyrod bought 90 of these helmets for his high school because he's an investor in the company. And he called us and said, got to get these for my high school. These are fantastic. And bought helmets there. But then he came back to me this year and said, gosh, I want 200 of them for my youth league. There's no better compliment to us than when someone that's wearing the helmet or somebody buys it for their son or daughter, or in the case of Cam Rising, Cam had some NIL money and he wanted to put some nickels in the jukebox. He's like, hey, I got targeted 7 times last year and I didn't have an injury. And my parents would like to invest in the company. To me, that's the ultimate compliment. And Peter Cummins' son, Dr. Cummins, who wrote the book Brainwashed with Merrill Hodge, he's a forensic neurologist. His son wears our helmet. If that isn't the best blessing that a company can get, with the exception maybe of my son who played here at Cathedral Catholic for 4 years, played Pop Warner, took a shot at Utah, got cut, and he's choosing, gosh, he's not up for the 60-hour work week. He's a car guy and going to jump on the rugby team. But that to me is important. Everyone that comes in this office to get fit, I go and meet them. If they make a point of coming into our office, they took off work for the day to come in here, whether it's a coach, whether it's a player. And, we get the kids from Mater Dei or De La Salle or Cathedral come in here to get fitted, or it's a Pop Warner kid. In the end, this is about the player and it's about the sport. And, we can get in a little bit into the politics of this as well. Football is part of American fabric and our culture. And I can tell you this, that having been a fan before I was ever imagined owning a football helmet company, since then, I've been in half a dozen, probably more than that, dozen NFL locker rooms, dozens of college locker rooms with high school kids, coaches at AYF conventions, Pop Warner conventions, coach myself. The kids are the most polite kids. And I don't care if it's a guy like Devontae Adams that asked about our helmet before he got traded. If it's a college player at Utah, whether it's going to Orlando with all the AYF coaches a couple years back, the people in this sport are kind, polite, respectful. The sport teaches grit, determination, goal setting. Kids get structure. Nobody cares on third down if a black kid, a white kid, an Armenian kid, an Asian kid, it doesn't matter. It's 3rd and 12. We got to get this done. I've been bleeding and sweating with these guys all year long. We have this great shared experience. One of my great coaching stories with Pop Warner kids was I'm at a high school 7-on-7 before the season starts, and my son is there. And all of a sudden, these 7 kids from one of the other schools kind of surround me. And I'm like, oh, this is unique. And I get the deep voice, Coach Nick. And, there's no better feeling than that. But for us to continue to enjoy this, because football participation rates went down for a long time.
Yeah.
And until about 3 years ago, it started to grow again. And some of that was the movie, which had some fact in it and a little bit of fiction. The game's safer to play than it's ever been. But I will tell everyone that when you have one company that has 80% market share, another one that's got 19% market share, and I'm giving you rough numbers, that competition will breed a better helmet. It will breed better shoulder pads. It'll breed better turf and everything else. People have to be open to this, because if you keep buying from the same people because of the relationship and you're not looking at the technology, how it impacts the player's safety, but also the performance, you get the same result. And the same result will not continue to keep the sport going, because all the people that have not played, the people where their kid hasn't played and they've seen the impact on their son or daughter, they don't necessarily like football. They don't like the mentality of it. They think that it's violent. They don't think that you have this fairly combative 8 seconds and someone blows a whistle and you have to stop. And if you don't stop, it penalizes your team and it calls you out and they call your number out and you're personally responsible for that error. people don't think about that. And I think football is such an awesome sport, and that's why we're here. And we'll get into other sports too. But yeah, sorry, I got off on the soapbox there for a bit. But we're football fans. We're not just light helmet fans.
Yeah, I think you said something in there, and bringing up the families. That was a question I was going to ask you about. That's part of the experience too, right? Making sure what that player may feel is the most important part of the experience. Having a helmet that can perform well. Mom and dad, especially mom, probably are really looking at the safety aspect of this and making sure that you're putting the best technology on his head. And I think that's what in learning a lot about the things that are necessary and then seeing what your company does was exciting to me, that to know, like, if I was coaching right now and I brought this helmet into the program, I could feel really good about those things. I could feel really good about the experience that I'm creating as part of my culture that looks at everything, that looks at the safety, that looks at the performance. And I think as you've gone through here, I mean, you've checked a lot of those boxes that I think people would look at to say, should this be a part of my program?
Yeah, and we've learned as we've gone. We acquired the assets of SG, I think, at the end of 2019. And our first helmet was a great helmet, but it was a little rough. It was unrefined. When Ford came out with the Raptor pickup truck, the first one kind of felt like somebody had built a race car, that it was individual components and parts put together, and it was kind of a special vehicle. But when you get in one now, it's pretty refined. Our first helmet had some rough edges on it, literally and figuratively. Great helmet, protected a lot of kids, performed well on the field for performance and a safety perspective, resizable, etc. But what we've developed this into has really been from coaches, players, parents. We have a component on our helmets, this little trim piece here. It's called the Barch bar. Ben Barch from the 49ers said, "Hey, got a big neck, brother. The edge of the helmet is chafing a little bit." So we made a component that reduced that. And that was just from listening. We've had equipment managers at Utah. "Hey, can you change these pad sets so that when they bend, that there's not a little wrinkle in between them that leaves a mark on the player, creates stress there because it's uncomfortable." By collecting all of that data and then being able to be nimble and act on it is huge. But those are big programs. When mom is contemplating not letting their son or daughter play tackle football because they're worried about injury, who's the advocate for that? Is it USA Football? Is it AYF? Is it Pop Warner? Is there a resource that's going to really promote football and advocate of football? For us, we encourage you, go to our site. Football's never been safer to play. The rules have changed. There's nobody hammering Oklahoma drills head to head, the way they used to. They wouldn't even allow us to drink water when I played football. In high school, we kind of drank water when I was my short career at Whitewater. But everything has changed. The way we look at players, the way we look at injury. And yeah, is football perfect? No, it's not. You have 5.6 million young people playing football. But the game has continued to improve. The equipment has improved, but it's not improved in a manner that it's improved to check the box, in my opinion. So you have these tests, and you can build a helmet to check, pass the test, check the box, which we've done. But how does it perform on field? Because nobody records injuries, at AYF based on helmet model type or any of these things. We had a school here, Mar Vista High School in San Diego, and I'm giving this example, and these are real numbers. They switched from Riddell helmets, or competitive helmet, to our helmet, 17 concussions down to 4. And we're like, gosh, that still seemed like a lot for us, even though it was cutting it down by 75%. Well, 2 of the players said, "Hey, we want to wear our old helmet." So it really went from 17 to 2. We took a lot of pride in that. And, non-scientific number, it's anecdotal. I don't know what type model helmets were there, how old they were, any of those other things. But that's important to us. But the big thing for us is when I have a trauma doctor that he has a real career, this isn't an infomercial doctor, that's willing to go on video, put it on YouTube, and state lightweight is critical. Fitment is critical. These helmets are the best helmets that money can buy, whether you're a coach or a parent or a league or a team. That means a lot to me. And it even means more to me when these physicians come back to us after a year or two of watching this, and they're willing to invest in the company because they believe in it. These are wealthy guys with careers. They have a lot to lose by jumping in the pool with a company that has a perceived liability, right? Why, as a physician that's making a lot of money, would you do that? Because you care about your patients just like we care about our players. But my goal in this thing, I told one of the executives at the NFL, I want this to be the first piece of equipment that goes into the Hall of Fame. We've had players, we've had coaches, we've had ancillary people. We want to change the game of football at that level, but I also want to change it for the kid that he may not even be able to play at a big high school because it's gotten so competitive and because people are holding kids back and we have specialized. But for that kid to play in a freshman team, all the things that he can learn, that his mom and dad feel that he's got the best equipment available at a reasonable price because our pricing is within the brackets. Yeah, you can go out and buy a $100 helmet. Trust me, probably not a good idea. And you can buy a $1,700 helmet that doesn't perform as well as, let's say, our $695 helmet. But we want those parents to have confidence when their son or daughter goes out that we're doing our part, which is the helmet. Your show, Keith, is going to get the coaches to think different. You shape minds with information, whether you're interviewing me or someone about turf or something about how do you deal with kids that are struggling or how do you deal with outliers that are playing really well. All of those things matter. And just like in the military, just like in a business, you have to be introspective to make these changes. But we offer, and I can say this with 100% certainty, and my son wouldn't have worn the helmet, that we feel we're making the best helmets on the planet at a reasonable price so that mom and dad can afford it, Junior can wear it, and he's comfortable and he has a good experience.
Yeah, I think that's so important. Really appreciate what you guys are doing. It's been great to get you here. The politics side is probably a separate show we can get into at another time. Certainly, I've had a lot of those conversations with Dr. Peter Cummings and Merrill Hodge. Both of those guys have been on the podcast. I'll have to put the links to those in our show notes. But I commend you guys for what you're doing. It's been exciting to watch your growth over this time. And, I look forward to staying in touch and seeing what you guys continue to do and innovate to help our game.
No, I appreciate you having me on, Keith. And I just say this last note is, someone like yourself that's interviewing different people with different opinions, different products, et cetera. It lets the coaches really drill down, learn a little bit more, because the majority of information that you get in this space is from the manufacturer, right? You're going to get a story from me. You're going to get a story from my competitors. You're going to get a story from the turf company, the shoe company, the uniform company, et cetera. But it really comes down to performance and safety. And if we can wind those two things together and we can provide a good experience for the player and the player's family, and there's no one that's played football that I've talked to, and I've talked to a lot of people, that says, I wish I didn't play football. Nobody says that. But I've had, whether it's Rick Meyer, Mike Haynes, I can go through the list of players, Drew Stanton, Tony Romo. God, I wish I would have had these helmets when I played because it would have made a difference. And one of the first people that called me, we announced that we had bought the company. We hadn't even started selling anything yet. And the caller ID came through and it said, Rick Meyer. Meyer's calling me. So I was kind of nervous. I didn't know whether I should take the call or not. And he's like, hey, I saw that you're making these lighter helmets. The worst injury I ever had, or head injury, was hitting my head on the turf when I was playing at Notre Dame. You meet me for a coffee. And I went and I met with he and his father. And we had a great conversation. And so many players like that have been motivational for us. Current players that are playing, past players, coaches. We love the game, but when you hear from people that played at the highest level that we're on the right track, or that someone like you takes the time to talk to us as opposed to just kind of riding the train on what everyone's doing, it means a lot to us. But I think it does a great service to the sport, to the player, to the parent, and to all of us, because the kids are all better when they get done playing this game. And unfortunately, football usually chooses when it's done with us before when we're done with football. But we're all better for it. And, you're making the game better by having these dialogues. So I appreciate being here.
Yeah. Thank you, Nick. Appreciate your time. Thank you again to Nick Esayian for joining us. And be sure to check out Light Helmets at www.lighthelmets.com. Be sure to check out all of our partners. Modern football technology will save you hours of work and help you make better decisions. Signature championship rings for when you win the championship in 2025. Titan GPS for tracking player performance. And the Headset app, a new way to communicate that really saves on your budget. Links to all of our partners are in the show notes. Follow all we're doing at coachandcoordinator.com and follow us on X at Coach K Grabowski.